In the first of the Getting Started demo, you learned how to use the Run Shell task in a workflow and display information about the machine on which the workflow is run. In this part of the demo, you will learn how to loop the workflow on multiple machines using a call workflow task. Let's get started. First, you need to create multiple machines. In the Part 1 demo, you learned how to create a machine in Epsilon. Follow the same steps to create a few more machines on which you can loop the workflow. After you create a few machines, you need to add them to an entity. Entities are useful modeling constructs that you can use as a container to hold multiple machines. An entity called ENT0 is already defined, so let's associate the machines with ENT0. To do this, on the Entities tab, click the ENT0 entity. On the Editing Entity page, click Associate Machines on the Associate a Machine to an Entity window. Select all the machines that you need and click Associate Machines. Next, to associate credentials to these machines, under the Credentials tab, click the key icon. The credential that you created in the previous demonstration displays in the window. Select the Associate checkbox and click Done. Repeat this for all the machines that you just associated with this entity. Now you need to create a workflow. To do this, click the Workflows tab and then click Create a Workflow. Enter a name for the workflow. In this case, it is Hostname Survey. Click Save and Continue. We need to use this workflow to call the workflow that we created in the previous demo, which runs the hostname command on a single machine. To do this, first, under the Task Tree tab, click the add sign and select Loop Task. Change the loop type to for loop so that the workflow loops over each machine of the entity. In the Loop Over List field, enter the macro as shown in the demo. This macro selects all the machines of the entity against which the workflow will be run. Enter a name for all the machines in the loop variable field. In this case, enter MC. This macro variable will be set to the value of the current loop iteration. The speedup factor determines the number of loop children you can run in parallel. For example, if the speedup factor is 10, the workflow will run 10 loop children in parallel in each run. If this is set to 15, the workflow will run 10 in the first iteration and the remaining 5 in the next iteration. In this case, leave the default value as is and click Create and Return to Workflow. Under the Task Tree tab, expand the workflow that you just created and click the add sign under it. You need to create a meta task under this workflow. A meta task allows you to define scope. Give this task a name and click Create and Return to Workflow. Under this meta task that you just created, click the add sign. Select the Call Workflow task. Under the Call Workflow tab, from the Choose Workflow dropdown, select the workflow that you created in the Part 1 demo. Do not forget to give this task a name. After you are done, click Create and Return to Workflow. Now you need to edit the meta task. To do this, click the task and click Edit. On the Editing page, click the Entity MC tab. For each iteration of the loop, you need to change the machine. To do this, click the Update EMC button. Under the Machine column, click the Edit icon and enter the macro variable from the loop task, which will give you the machine for this loop iteration as shown. Under the Credential column, select the credential that you created earlier. You can alternatively use a macro that, depending on the selected machine, selects a credential associated with the machine by virtue of belonging to this entity. After you are done, click Select. Click Save and Run Workflow. Click Change and select the newly created entity, then click Select and then Start. The results display a loop with 3 iterations, all successfully run. In one of the loops, select the call workflow under it, and under that, run the workflow that you created in the previous demo. The output displays the name of the machine on which that workflow ran. You can run the same workflow in all the loop iterations and view the same output. Now let's create a report that displays an HTML table listing all the machines on which this workflow has run. To do this, let's edit the hostname survey workflow. Click the add sign to add a confirmed task. Under the Confirm tab, click Source. Create a basic table using HTML tags in the message field. This table will display as many rows as the number of loop iterations, with each row displaying the loop iteration of a different machine. The table will have 2 columns, one that displays the machine on which the workflow is run, and another that displays the output of the task run. The use of HTML tags will be explained later in this demonstration. You will need to use a reportable macro for this task. For this, enter the macro name as shown in the demo. This macro will generate as many rows as the number of loop iterations in the workflow. After you are done, click Create and Return to Workflow. On the Task Tree tab, under the Get Hostname task, click Edit. Click the Messages tab and select Reportable. Click Save and Run Workflow. Click Change and select the entity, then click Start. Click the Show Machine Report Run Shell task. In the output window, you will see that the macro that was used in the workflow has expanded into 3 rows, depicting the 3 machines on which this workflow ran. Generating this code in HTML makes it clear that the reportable macro provides a very useful method of generating reports in a separate part of the workflow. This macro ran successfully because a task was set as reportable. With the reportable task, you can select a child task that contains the information that you require and set this task as reportable. Subsequently, after you run the workflow, you can extract the status and output of every loop child. See the Epsilon FAQs on the support portal where you can find information about a task that is set as reportable. You have learned to run a loop and how to generate a report outside of the main logic of the workflow without having to write little tasks to generate reports. In this case, we used HTML to generate a table. You are free to use any markup language, such as Markdown, to generate a similar report.